and we want to hear about your colleague and about the book that you've written together.
Well, Shelley, thank you very much. Arun Tiwari and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss our book, India Wakes, Post-Coronavirus New World Order. Arun, are you there? I would like to introduce you.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Arun. How are you today?
I'm very fine, sir. Nice to see you, sir.
Great to see you. The idea for our book occurred when I was visiting Arun in Hyderabad last year. And I was, one of the things I do when I visit people is I look at their books. And I was looking through his book collection, and it occurred to me that we would have maybe a common interest to write something about the US-India relationship. And I had just written an article called calling for the decoupling of the United States from China. And Arun was interested in that idea because I was saying the inevitable outcome of that would be a closer engagement with India. And Arun seemed to like that idea. Arun Tiwari is a very distinguished author and scientist. Believe it or not, he invented the stent for heart problems. He's a missile scientist. He was counselor for Dr. APJ Kalam, president of India. He has written 24 books. He's one of the most erudite and distinguished authors in India, having written one book called Wings of Fire, which sold over 1 million copies. So he is very, very well known, and I'm honored to be his co-author. So what I thought I would do is explain the intellectual odyssey. In fact, I bought this article, I don't know if you can see, called Admit China to the WTO Now. It was in the Washington Post, 1999 op-ed section. And like many Americans, I argued for the admittance of China to the World Trade Organization. And it turns out, in retrospect, was spectacularly wrong, as were a lot of Americans. And I made 4 principal arguments. I said, first of all, in the area of foreign policy, this was going to really help the US-China relationship. And that turned out, for anyone who is not living in a cave the last 10 years, to be wrong. The US relationship with China has dramatically declined over the last decade and is still going in a very negative direction. So it's obvious that the accession, getting China in and trying to make it a responsible stakeholder in the world community of nations didn't work from that standpoint. Secondly, I argued that it would increase US exports. Well, that hasn't happened either. In fact, over the last decade, the US trade deficit with China has doubled from $227 billion to over $420 billion. So that argument turned out to be wrong when China really didn't let in the US goods, although it was getting free access to the US market. And the third argument I made is that this would help protect US intellectual property rights. This has been a sore point for the US for many years with China. And as a practicing lawyer in this area, I can tell you it's still a big issue on patents, trademarks, and copyrights in China. So that didn't work. And my final spectacularly wrong assertion was that this would lead to the privatization of China, the development of its private economy. And in fact, since 2012 and the ascension of Xi Jinping to become president of China, the exact opposite has happened. We've seen a dramatic growth of the public sector in China. Their state-owned enterprises are getting credit from banks, these non-performing loans, and the private sector is getting big-time squeezed for credit. So I, along with many other Americans, really felt quite misled. And so it came to be that I went to Arun with this proposition to say, well, look, if there's going to be a need to decouple the US from China, and by the way, there may be a need to decouple India from China, that's another subject for discussion. Now, how can we structure this relationship in a way that'll work? So he liked that argument, suggested that we write a book on how to do this. And meanwhile, the world fell apart with the coronavirus pandemic. And that changed the argument a lot, but only in the sense that it accentuated the trends that had already been underway towards nationalization, deglobalization, and interestingly enough, the Indians went more in our direction of being anti-Chinese. In In fact, there was a recent online survey by News 18, an Indian media company, finding that 91% of the respondents in India favored a boycott of Chinese goods. I mean, that's what it's come to in India right now on vis-a-vis China. So the world that India now wakes is a world that's been decimated by the coronavirus. And India now is going to face what the US has faced for a long time. And it's really not a pretty picture. But looking into this, India wakes to this nightmare. I'd like to turn it over to Arun Tiwari to discuss how India can respond to this pandemic and also treat this as a teachable moment where we can learn from this experience and have a more livable planet come out of all this instead of our carping at each other and mutual self-destruction. So I'd like to turn it over to Arun at this point, and it's your show. How should India respond to this situation?
Thank you, sir. When Mr. Fisher came to my home, I was recovering from a health problem. And my first impression was that I was attending the previous lecture and the mentor and the life lesson. And I had the fortune of having Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam mentoring me for 33 years. And he taught me the baby steps in how to make missiles. And then he became the president of India. And with him, we met the big people, how the system works, how the countries decide, how the power moves the world. So it was a nice experience. And he passed away in 2015. And after that, I thought, what is the point in working with anybody after working with such a legend? So I was at home. And then suddenly Mr. Fisher walked in my house. And my first impression was that Dr. Kalam has come back. And I saw him. And when he told me this idea, so basically I'm an engineer. And America is the biggest economy machine in the world ever existed. So if they decouple from China, they have to couple with somebody. Because the motor cannot be, the electricity, if it is generated, it has to be plugged with some supply system. So if US has to decouple with China, it ought to couple with India, it ought to couple with Brazil, it ought to couple with the rest of the economy. I mean, it is impossible to decouple just like that. The moment it decouple, it has to couple with somebody. That idea fascinated me. And then we started writing the book. And the second point which Professor was telling that the mentor does not monitor you. So he allows you to do whatever you. So I wrote the way I used to write with Dr. Kalam. But Dr. Kalam was a scientist, he was a philosopher, and here I was talking to a seasoned attorney who for every word there is a shade. And he used to, I mean, he pruned out half of what I used to write. And for me, it has been a wonderful training. It has been a wonderful training. And finally, when the book has come out, I mean, we were amazed. I always believed, I'm not talking spirituality, but what I'm trying to tell you is that I always believed that there is a higher order of things. What Adam Smith has told, invisible hand or providence or whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. The name does not matter. The point is that there is a higher power working upon you. And what we were trying to say in the book, that these are the trends. Suddenly when the pandemic came, we were amazed to see that exactly what we were trying to say could happen, started happening. And as if we were made to write this book 6 months in advance. Now, the second point I want to make is that I am of the firm belief that what we see happening today was started happening many decades back. And it's not that something is happening now. It has to happen that way because there are certain processes and there are certain things. There are certain patterns which already started many years back, many decades back, sometimes centuries back. And then it has to manifest now. So this word is not to be made now. We have to understand, we have to connect the dots. And if we have to connect, if we do not know the dots, how can we connect it and extrapolate it? So we decided that let's make a big canvas. So how India got the independence? It's very fashionable to say that India got the independence through the great non-violence movement. But the fact is that there was a great event called Atlantic Charter that President FDR and Winston Churchill, they spent 3 days in somewhere in backwaters near Canada. And President FDR very clearly told, look, buddy, if you want our help, we don't believe in this empire building. You have to wind up, you have to roll back your empire and allow people to live with freedom and liberty. That is what America stands for. And then only America entered into the World War II. Now, some of these fascinated things which are brilliant stories, because it is not convenient to tell these stories, we thought that these stories have to be gleaned from wherever they are available and put into a book. So we did a lot of research and we picked out the old photographs, a copy of the Atlantic Charter, and they were the good old days. Some 9 points were written and nobody signed it, because once you write something of the stature of FDR and Winston Churchill, it is done. There is nothing like signing and putting it at all, somebody attesting it, you are going to a notary and all that, all these things does not exist. So this was a new world order was born. And that world order took the world in a direction which led to the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and the Cold War ended. And then how this China, without any precaution, was entered into WTO. Now, America created the entire, the computer, the information technology, the World Trade Order, everything systematically got created over years by very wise people with lot of thought process, and the DNA of all that was freedom and liberty, the rule-based system. And then China gets in, where the only one rule that everybody work for the Communist Party of China. And we dig up, because Bhatt is a is a big Chinese scholar, and I also visited 7-8 times. And one of my book, Wings of Fire, was even translated in Chinese. So I had a fairly good experience. Very difficult to even understand or guess what is their mind is working. So they entered into WTO, and the games like currency manipulation, the intellectual property theft, and what all, which is against the spirit of World Trade Organization, started happening. And at the top of it, when the whole world is fighting how to contain coronavirus, they decided to sneak into the Indian territory and see, if you want territory, declare a war. What is this idea of sneaking into a country by stealth and set up your post, send your patrol people? I mean, this is, I mean, we were shocked that you are a world power. You are thinking of leading the world, want to become the future superpower of the world. Then some conduct, some rule base, some stature, some ethics, as professor was telling in the class, have to be maintained. Great powers do not sneak like a thief in somebody else's territory. So all these things put together, the point is that what are the choices the world is happening? Are we entering towards a Cold War situation? Are we entering towards all the democracies coming together and fighting this predatory hegemonic power? And as far as India is concerned, because we are immediate neighbors to them, we have $60 billion trade deficit. So how do we position ourselves? Shall we stand up and fight? Shall we join them? Shall we do we become a balancer between United States and China, or we become a US ally and stop the expansionism, which has no place in the modern world? There's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of underdevelopment, and everybody has to work together to make this planet rather more livable. This is not the point this is not the time, this is not the era to change the boundary lines. And the last point I want to make is that the next conflict is going to be on the waters, because so far on the trust, the doctrine of the waters are free, the international waters are free. But now that there is a lot of oil and gas available under the sea bed, so this 12 nautical miles or 20 nautical miles has become 200 nautical miles. And now the ambition is that everybody want to get wherever the gas and oil is available. And South China Sea is going to be a very, very complicated thing. So the time is that the new world order is going to be really new. And we have to think not only out of the box. There is no box now. And how do we manage it? The best minds of the country, of the world, they should come together and think for the humanity. Think for the humanity, think for the good of the mankind, and not that my agenda. And within the countries also, the very interesting thing is happening. The two political parties, they talk as if they are talking about two different nations, or they are talking about two different people. Now, this is a very bad sign for democracy. National interests are paramount. The party which wins the election rules for the term, and the party who loses the election should have the dignity of being a responsible opposition. They can always criticize the government, but they should not allow anything which harm the nation, because nation is supreme. So with this theme, I had the benefit of a great teacher, Bart, in my life. I saw as if my mentor has resurrected himself and came back to guide my hand. And the product is there. Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus and all the Mumbai is totally locked down. We are still not able to contain the virus. So it could not, copies could not reach Bart as we attempted to. But in few days he will be getting, and professor will be getting the copy. And my request would be that we are not great authors, but we are great students. And what together Bart and I did was that we thoroughly, rigorously gleaned whatever is being written by different people in different countries. And those voices we put together. And like you make a rosary from so many beads and so many pearls, we made this book. And it's not our book. We just compiled it together. What is going on in the collective consciousness of the nation today? And I'm very sure that it will trigger a process of dialogue, trigger the process of thinking. And we need new ideas. We need ethics back. And we need a good and better future for the humanity. So with these words, I conclude my introduction and look forward to suggestions coming from other participants in the group.
Mr. Tiwari, thank you so much. I have to admit to you that my first book I ever wrote was entitled The U.S., India, and the Bomb. I wrote it in 1969. And I visited Delhi and was very impressed with the people that I met. I have continued to study India a little as I've gone along. Asia is one of my main interests. And just to talk about the New World Order and separate out China and decoupling for a second. What do the U.S. and India have to do internally to facilitate a better relationship and a more interactive set of economies? Because there are a lot of impediments built up over the years, one of which might be an element of mistrust that seems to be leaving now. But what can India and the United States do internally to facilitate a new relationship?
Sir, the biggest problem with China is that their statecraft is like an infection. They enter into your society, they enter in academia, they enter into the businesses, they buy shares here and there. And when you really want to decouple from China, you will find that a very large number of your own people, your own institution, your own banks, your own businesses, they say, no, how can you decouple? And we also have this problem in India. So it is fighting, it's like fighting an infection. I can't be infected for the rest of my life, otherwise I will eventually die. So I have to cure myself. So the challenge before any democratic country, the prime example is United States and India and other countries, they have to rise to this occasion that democracy should not be used to harm democracy. Now that is a very unfortunate situation, because in our countries it is very easy to talk. Expression of freedom is there. Anybody can criticize anything. There are many people who don't even name the United States president. They say the current president said like that. There is a serious protocol issues are going on. So democracy should not be used against democracy. And a country where there is nothing like democracy, some 8 people rule for whatever they feel like. In fact, we have included in our book a very famous speech by Chairman Mao, where he told the 10 fundamental relationships. And in that it is very clearly written that the law should serve the interest of the Communist Party of China. Now that is fantastic. There is no liberty, there is no freedom, there is no Magna Carta, there is nothing. It is only the entire system operate for the Communist Party of China. And Communist Party of China is 8 people. So how do we stop them, or how do we safeguard our democracy, our ideals? It's going to be a very big channel, a big challenge. It's going to be a very big challenge.
How does, I understand and I appreciate the difficulty of it, but specifically leaving China out of the picture, how can the U.S. and India work more closely together? Do changes have to occur in our laws, in our diplomacy, in our personal relationships to improve and facilitate the interaction between India and the U.S.?
So the biggest,
okay.
Bart?
Yeah, let me just make a few comments on that. The answer is yes. There's a lot the U.S. could do with its bilateral relationship with India. For starters, the U.S. could give generalized system of preferences, GSP, in the trade area. And just to the contrary, the Trump administration withdrew GSP treatment from India. It's exactly the wrong thing to do.
Explain what that means to students who are not expert.
Yes, GSP stands for Generalized System of Preferences. In other words, duty-free treatment. Instead of having a tariff, bearing a tariff, it's a good cross the border. Right. They come in duty-free. So that's right. That's called GSP, Generalized System of Preferences. And the U.S. has for many years had this program to assist developing countries. And India certainly, although it's large, has a per capita income of around $2,000. So they're still a developing country, and under any legitimate basis should qualify for GSP, and did for many years. So really the number one thing the U.S. should do right away is give GSP status. You remember India used to have what they call the Commonwealth preference in the old days.
With Britain, yeah.
With Britain, UK. And now we need the American preference. That's the world that's changed. That's the world we're now in. And to withdraw GSP or the preference from India was just the wrong signal by the Trump administration. And they should promptly then negotiate a trade agreement with India. Now, the interesting thing about India is that it would be a different kind of agreement because India has such tremendous software programmers and digital talent that the agreement would encompass trade in goods, services, and capital. And services include technology, which would mean the US should not withdraw H-1B visas for Indian software engineers, which the administration just did again.
Just did, yeah.
Just did. I mean, it's unbelievable. If you had to drop a policy that would hurt India and US companies harder, it'd be hard to think of a policy like that. So it really has to make you wonder who's driving the bus in the White House on that kind of issue. So number one, give GSP. Number two, have a investment treaty, a bilateral investment treaty that protects investments in both ways. That would be a good housekeeping seal of approval and give a US investor confidence to go into India. You know, Walmart went in and the government of India promptly changed the rules when they saw that Walmart was going to hurt a lot of mom and pops in India. So you need an investment environment that the US and India should have this bilateral investment treaty. And interestingly, now we have a situation on defense. Obviously, Arun is the expert. I want Arun to comment on how we can cooperate together in the defense area. But now the pandemic has shown us that both India and the United States have become overly dependent on China for medical supplies, because now we're at a point where we need PPE, personal protective equipment. And where do we get it? We get it from China. Oh, that's great. They're the guys where it started, and all of a sudden they're making a lot of money off of the pandemic. Something seems wrong with that picture. But India has had the same problem. Now they've discovered they're getting their vaccines from China and what they call active reagents from China. And so both countries have to have a cooperation relationship involving treatments, vaccines, testing for the coronavirus pandemic that we're now in. So there is a lot we can do together, that we should do together. And Arun, I'd like you to talk about the security aspects. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
See, what happened over many decades, we have written a full chapter in our book on the military industry complex. And for a very long time, we worked very closely with Soviet Russia. And after Soviet Russia became Russia, a lot of industry has gone into Ukraine. And most of the spare parts, most of the subsystems, now they are no more available with Russia. So it is a very complex situation. And without spares, without technology upgrade, these things won't work. So in the last 4 or 5 years, I was very pleasantly seeing that there is a communication protocol, there is a logistic protocol, and both the countries are coming together. And this process should continue. And we have a very large public sector, which is dysfunctional, which is obsolete, but it needs investment. And there is a model which is called state-owned enterprises in China. So what I feel is that the Indian public sector should be owned by their American counterpart companies, which are state-owned, and they should infuse the technology and the capital. And then only we can compete with China in Africa, in Latin America, and elsewhere in the world, because you have to compete. As Bart has very nicely used a word in the book called compete and containment. Okay, you can always fight, but a good policy is how do we contain, how do we compete? And India and the United States is an excellent combination to contain China and to compete with China. This is what I feel, sir.
Thank you. I think we should, we're about 11:35. We should open it up to students, many of whom have origins from India and others who are quite interested in the dynamics in Asia. So let's open to the students for their questions. It takes a minute or two to unmute and get on.
I wanted to ask a question.
Please.
So, yes, I wanted to learn a bit more, sort of understand, like, how can other I understand that the US and the India with their relationships could help each other in decoupling from China, but how can other countries play a role so that it helps boost? Because from my perspective, it's understood that China, not only in manufacturing, but also in softwares, in other sort of aspects of like daily life, have been able to sort of come together and like it's become a part of our daily life. So how can other countries also help US and India to sort of get away from being reliant only on China?
The whole supply chain integration. Yeah.
Well, let me take a cut at that. I think the, Shelley, you just said the key words, the supply chain issue. The first comment, though, is that I believe that the other countries in the South Asia, Southeast Asia region could work with the US in a cooperative way. And here I'm talking about Japan, Australia, Philippines, Vietnam, to help a balancer with the US. In fact, in the book, we talk about setting up, converting the G7 into the D10, a coalition of the 10 democracies in the world, counter China and other dictatorships, and be a bastion for freedom. So obviously, it's not just a US-India bilateral thing. It's the US will have to bring in, and India, other countries, and work, as we say in the book, to both contain and compete. And on the competition side, obviously we need to develop for the digital economy in tandem with India, I think. I've had experience in India operating a software company called Blue Lotus, actually. So I've had seen firsthand how good these Indian software programmers are. I mean, this is under the law of comparative advantage, this is what the US needs. And what's interesting is this is the new battlefield. India yesterday said they will not allow TikTok and other social media from China. And the US is now considering that, as in today's Washington Post. So the digital world, the cyberspace, cybersecurity, that'll be the new battlefield. And we'll need the cooperation of other nations to really contain China in that area as well. Arun, I'd welcome your comments on that, because I know you're the expert on that.
One of the very serious problem with China is that they very systematically destroy the local industry. So small workshops, small people, handicraft people who are supplying to the local markets to 100,000 people. So once the Chinese goods come and they manipulate their currency and they price it in such a way, what they call it China price, that nobody can compete in the market against them. So it is very important that we do not allow our small and medium-sized industries to be killed permanently, because if that happen, then it's like spinal cord of the economy is gone. So it is high time that China is contained, and if by this D10 or this kind of grouping, about 3-4 billion people in the planet, they simply have China free supply chains. There is no other option actually. And if you don't do it, then future generations are going to curse the present leaderships. It is so serious. So the problem has to be faced now, and faced in clearly term, and there is no compromise, there is no middle ground actually. And America made China flushing with currency. 20 years since they joined WTO, that entire money, it should not be used to buy businesses elsewhere in the world. It should not be used to by governments of the developing countries, though it's a very difficult task. And more than the military, I think it is the brains, the people, the attorneys, the business people, the financial expert. They should wake up and they should design a system which does not sell the freedom and liberty of the future generations. That is how I feel.
I think the focus on other countries presents a dilemma because some of them are hedging. They're not completely on board with the idea of containing China for fear that there might be some repercussion to them. And they may be hesitant. I know quite a bit about the Philippines, and it's going to take some time before they come on board with this idea. But it's an interesting idea because China has, because of its aggressive moves in Asia, especially in the South China Sea, and with the territorial disputes with Vietnam and Taiwan and the Philippines, has earned some enmity in those areas. But on the other hand, as Bart points out, the United States hasn't always helped its own cause because it looks at interactions between the U.S. and some of these countries as a zero-sum game, and it's not willing to extend the economic tools that they might need or the reassurance that they might need in any sort of new world order. So it's going to be many decades in the making, or at least many years in the making, wouldn't you say, Bart, for people to come around to this idea, especially the idea of the D10, which I think is an interesting proposition.
Well, the problem in writing this whole book has been that we're trying to build an airplane while we're flying it. This world is changing day by day. It's really so rapidly that, to me, the interesting thing is, Shelley, I know you remember this, in 1999, Francis Fukuyama wrote an article, a very famous article, and in a book called The End of History. I'm sure you remember that.
Yes, indeed. I do remember.
That was the end. You remember that was the end of history. Remember? That was the triumph of the liberal democratic idea. We had won. The Cold War was over. You remember all that? And the plaudits, the roses were flown, the rose petals in Fukuyama's path. Okay.
He had to write another book.
Yeah, he had to write another book later to correct that. The point of it is that there's a pendulum in history. There's a pendulum. And what's so fascinating about this study that Arun and I have been working on is that the pendulum was just so swinging towards China with Xi Jinping and what they call the Beijing consensus seeming to be triumphing over the Washington consensus. The Washington consensus being then the liberal idea of that free markets would happen. And then the coronavirus thing hit when it was realized that it started in China. They did all they could to cover it up for at least a month or two, which cost the US many lives. And then China was literally stopped in its tracks. And all of a sudden, it looked like America might have a shot. But then America blew it. The Trump administration was poorly prepared for the pandemic, has acted really, as I point out in the book, lackadaisically negligent, really, about this. So for a while, it looked like the pendulum was swinging in the American way. But now, due to really the bungling of this thing and 50,000 new cases a day, literally in the US of the coronavirus, and no vaccine, no treatment, no testing at the scale required. So maybe, and now we have China selling this medical equipment to take care of the virus that originated there. I mean, so the pendulum has swung back and forth, And the question that we address in the book, and to me it's a fascinating question, which consensus will prevail? The Washington consensus, the Beijing consensus, and is there room for the Mumbai, India consensus? That's a fascinating middle way, perhaps. It's a more humanistic way to organize society than if you look at the income differentials in the US, and income inequality, in my mind, is a central problem of our time here in the US. India may have a way, a path to show us towards a third way, and that's, as a student of culture, we were trained that way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was very interested in Arun's perspective on the Indian sort of middle way here. And I was grafting onto that my Hegelian history studies of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and
Yeah.
all this, to me, it's a very fascinating subject. What's going to come out of all this? And the answer is not yet clear.
Not yet clear. Let's move to other students and their questions.
I have a question.
Please.
So my name is, I'll turn on my video if it works. Yeah. Hi,
There
my
you
name
go.
is Hannah Udine. I'm an incoming student at Harvard Law School, actually. And I just spent a year in India completing a Fulbright scholarship. So I was really excited to hear this discussion. My hesitation when discussing globalization in India is how it affects the working class, considering there's such a huge informal sector, and these are the poorest of the poor in India, and they will continue to work these jobs if we invest in India, if we build more factories. They'll have to deal with more pollution. How do we think about those people? How do we those people?
Excellent question.
Arun?
Sir, so far the world was moving on the routes like capitalism, and then socialism, and then communism, and then socialism with Chinese characteristics. But what actually happened is that we debased ourselves into financialism. That means whatever you want to do in your life, you want to get educated, take a loan. You fall sick, take a loan. So for everywhere, this renting things has come. For everything, a loan is given. Before a child is admitted in a school, loan is given for his education. Somebody falls sick, loan is given for his treatment. So this is the Chinese game. And this is going to destroy the basic rule-based and the liberty and justice-based society. Because when the people are under loan, naturally they are not free. They are not able to take the decisions which are rule-based. They just follow the orders of the person who is giving them the loan. Now, we have written a very detailed chapter on the Chinese spread in Africa. So this Belt and Road program, it is in the name of the construction, you are taking over territories. So this is a imperialism in the most naked form. And if we don't wake up, if we do not see the underlying what is going on, and still try to fool ourselves that it is just a policy, it is their policy, it's not our policy. So it is high time that we take care of the interest of the people, allow them to be self-sustained in a small way, and see to it that this Chinese price, this everything from China, from toys, the buckets and the ropes and the shoes. Now, these things have to be produced locally, wherever people are living, and allow them to flourish. That is the only way we have to move forward. So what this new system will be called, will it be a socialistic capitalism, which whatever it is, I don't know the name because the professor is the better person to, but something out of the box, something, some new thing has to be evolved, because we are facing a very, very new kind of I would say, the wild beast. You don't even know what is this species, because it is more like a robot, and we don't even know what program is fit into that. Because China is no more a communist country. It is something very different. So the intelligentsia, the academics of this world, they have to put their brains together and show the way. The way is not going to come from the political leaders, because they only know how to win the elections. And the way has to come from the academia. And some nice papers, some nice thesis, some nice statementship. And that is what a small beginning Bart and I have made. We started discussion, and it should not be used as a this side or that side. There's only one side. How to make this planet more livable for about 4 to 5 billion people who are still forced to survive for $1 or $2 a day. How do we change their condition? That is the challenge.
Bart, thank you, and that's an excellent point, sir. Thank you for that point. I want to ask Bart about some ideas that we see in the U.S. debate about inequality, combination of guaranteed annual income plus incentives to small and medium-sized businesses. Is that something that can catch on both here and in India, do you think? It seems like a growing idea now in the rapidly changing world we're living in.
Well, Andrew Yang was criticized in the campaign for suggesting that we pay people $1,000 a month.
Right.
And now the debate is moving in the direction of a sort of a guaranteed annual income. I think what we need to focus on is one of the great ideas Franklin Roosevelt had of the progressive income tax system. And that progressive taxation means you give a break to the guys at the lower end of the income scale, and you progressively increase the tax on the higher income classes. And that we really need to take a look, I think, at the U.S. tax code and how we treat different income classes and have
and corporations.
Well, in corporations, but that's a dilemma because the U.S. in 2 years ago, the U.S. lowered its income tax from 35% to 21% on corporations. But we had to do that to compete in the world market, so
yeah, we had to do it
to make ourselves an attractive, so U.S. companies wouldn't go overseas. It'd be more attractive to stay here. So it's a very complex question, but I'm really very concerned about how the fault lines of American society have been laid bare by the pandemic. We've now seen the greater burden fall on African Americans, Hispanic Americans, minorities, lower income people who have no social safety net. So I do believe we need to really look at the issue with social safety net.
And Indian socialism has not, they've lifted many millions of people out of poverty, but of course it hasn't erased poverty, as Arun suggested. And we have to keep our eye on that as a backbone of any society, having a livable wage and building that spinal cord that ties us all together within the society. I think your question, ma'am, was excellent, and you Harvard lawyers should get together and come up with some ideas for us. I appreciate that. Any other questions from the students?
Yes, we have two questions, Shelley, from two of our program associates. The first one is from Vivek Patel. And basically he thinks India and Americans' relations have significantly improved in the past 4 years. Considering both countries' interests in unity in opposition to China, do we see India and America standing together for a long-term relationship, even if there is a change in office this November? And another question comes from Jignil. He wonders, how can we simply convey the idea of decreasing the power of China's supply of products and the problem that other countries will have being reliant on China to the younger generation who might not be able to see the bigger picture?
Both good questions.
Arun?
Yes, sir. See, the bigger picture has to be seen. I mean, the biggest problem today is that people are not seeing bigger picture. There is no small picture. The picture emerges from the big picture. If the democracy is not invented by the forefathers of the American nation, that people can govern themselves, then we were suffering empires, very brutal, violent empires, crusades we were suffering, because they saw a dream that people can elect their own people. So we have a different world order. Similarly, if US does not interfere in the Second World War, if the Japanese imperialism is not checked, then we won't have this modern world. If the Microsoft, the Googles, the Facebooks, all these things are coming from which country? Other countries are copying. Now, copy masters cannot be leaders. I am very clear on that, because it is a mutated gene. It is not evolution. So the evolution the copy cannot substitute the evolution. So the point I am trying to make it here is that we have to see the new vision. How do we uplift the condition of the 5 billion people on this planet? And whosoever will find that answer, God will bless him. And this is the challenge to the academia. The academia, the people who are in the universities, they should rise to the occasion. People like Bart, who have seen this world, who have seen China, who have seen India, who have seen United States, but they do not belong to any party. And to answer the worry about yesterday only, candidate Biden has told that as far as our relationship with India is concerned, we are very alive to that, and India and US has to be together. I was very happy, because it is not an electoral decision. It is not the win to election. It is a question which not only affect the two great democracies, which are going to be a group of 10 democracies very soon. And obviously, America has to lead that. United States has to lead that, because that is the mother democracy, that is the oldest democracy, and that is the most successful democracy. Don't allow democracy to kill democracy. That is the game, and that is the challenge I see.
Thank you for your comments. Bart, you get the last word.
Yeah, on the decoupling issue, India could decouple from China, but really only at great cost to India. Its consumers get lower priced goods, and they need the investment from China as well as the US. So decoupling has to be done very selectively, very prudently, not in a haste. And same for the US in terms of decoupling. We have to be careful that we don't hurt ourselves, cut off our nose to spite our face, hurt ourselves in the process of decoupling. But it's clear that, say, for India, the key question is Huawei and the 5G issue, telecommunications going forward. Are they going to turn over that sensitive system to Huawei and the Chinese, which could easily backdoor through surveillance? Now, we have the same issue in the US, which is the administration here has effectively banned suppliers from buying from Huawei. So decoupling has to be done mostly on the technology side and defense-related items and medical-related items. We now have what we call health security, in addition to expanding the definition of national security. Now it has to include health security, if you know what I mean. So I think the last word is basically we have to be a long-term friend and ally of India. The game has changed. The game for India now is to not become collateral damage for a US-China trade war, which is possible. And so diplomacy now plays a big role. I think Modi has done a terrific job in India. I really do. I'm very much impressed with his bold, decisive moves on the GST, the general sales tax, and some of his economic reforms in the early years. And what I'd like to see Modi is get off of this nationalistic kick, BJP, and get back to focus on economic reforms for India. That's really what the people need. So I just want to thank you for the chance to give you my thoughts, and that's where
Well,
I'm
we
thinking.
thank you for both of you writing this book and giving us a lot to think about. And we are very happy that Osgood could be the launching pad for this discussion. It boils down to leadership and the concept of a strategy. And we have talked many times in this class about having an idea of where we're going, what goals we have, and how to attain it. And it requires new thinking. And I like the concept that don't think outside of the box, create a new box. There is not a box, and you have to build it. It's going to take leadership at the national level, in the academic world, in all of society. So the people who are in this class are hearing some of these ideas for the first time, and I'm delighted that we could be the vehicle for presenting them to the students. Everyone, whoops, did I lose you? Everyone, thank you again for our two guests. Thank you, students, for your good